Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Fastcuts. In this video, we are going to talk about a movie that belongs to the genre of mysteries and thrillers. The movie that came to my mind this week is the German Netflix original horror film, Blood Red Sky, released in 2021 and directed by Peter Thorwarth. The main character of this movie is played by Piri Baumeister. The movie tells the story of Nadja, a widow and mother, who also turns out to be a vampire. When the plane she is on gets hijacked by a group of terrorists, she must unleash her terrifying secret to protect her son and everyone on board. It isn't long before the entire plane becomes infested with blood-sucking vampires. I will be explaining the events that take place in this amazing vampire film. But before I do, I would truly appreciate it if you click the like button on this video. I have put lots of time and effort into making these videos. It lets me know that you are all enjoying the content. But without further ado, just sit back and relax. Join me as we travel in a vampire-infested plane in a blood-red sky. Our movie begins with a very intense scene located on a Scottish military airfield. Several military personnel are preparing for the emergency landing of an aircraft on Transatlantic 473 on a plane that was hijacked by a group of terrorists. The pilot is giving landing instructions to a stranger on board. As the pilot and co-pilot are presumed dead, the operation is being led by a Colonel, Alan Drummond, who attempts to make contact with personnel on board. He makes contact with a man in the cockpit who appears to have one of his hands amputated, saying that he isn't a terrorist. A little boy holding a teddy bear makes his way off the plane and is rescued by the military colonel, Drummond, who believes that there are several passengers on the plane. The plane is still being held hostage by the group of terrorists who plan to detonate it. However, they are unaware that the actual threat is a group of blood-sucking vampires waiting until darkness unleashes havoc. How the hell did a commercial airline flight get infested with a swarm of blood-sucking vampires? Hey, why don't we ask this traumatized little boy to recount the scariest moment of his life all over again? Find out. The rest of the film is a flashback that recounts the events that took place before the film's intro. The little boy's name is Elias and his mother's name is Nadja. In the mirror, we see Nadja putting on a wig while a TV broadcast about the rising surge in the stock market led by airline stocks plays in the background. We see Elias head to the airport alone to check in their luggage back at the hotel. We see Nadja speaking to an American doctor on the phone. It is not yet revealed at this point in the film, but Nadja is infected with vampirism. She and Elias are taking a flight to America so she can undergo a bone marrow transplant. She hopes to find something that will replace the vampire blood in her body and return her to normal human form. Elias had to check in their bags alone, as Nadja can't travel during the daytime because we know that vampires are prone to light, which makes them completely dead. When the sun goes down, she gets stopped at the security check because of her medication in the bathroom. Nadja consumes a small amount of blood and injects herself with a drug called ceterabine. It is a drug commonly used to treat cancer, but in her case, she is using it to suppress her vampirism. Elias meets a man named Farid, who is traveling to the US for a science convention. He astounds Farid with his knowledge while also violating HIPAA regulations by informing him of his mother's illness. They board the plane, and we meet some of the most typical passengers ever. The douchebag that hogs all the cargo space, the old couple, and the guy who flirts with the flight attendants. We see two men looking at each other, seeming pretty suspicious. They both meet a very flamboyant flight attendant named Robert. We see Nadja's vampirism starting to take a toll on her, trying to suppress her illness. The lack of blood intake is making her extremely weak and disoriented. In a flashback, we see a happy memory of her and her husband, Nikolai. Before she became infected, the couple, along with the baby, Elias, were driving home in the snow. When their car suddenly breaks down, Nikolai decides to do the most horrible thing ever. He decides to go look for help on his own. When leaving his wife and baby behind in the middle of nowhere, the next scene takes us to the present day on the plane. What's the worst that can happen right back on the plane? One of the passengers started to become rude and tried to physically assault Robert. One of the air marshals detains the man and takes him behind the curtain. Another marshal follows behind them. They got shanked in their freaking necks by Robert. It is revealed that Robert and the passenger, Carl, are terrorists who staged a disturbance in order to attract air marshals and kill them. Robert aka 8-Ball tells another terrorist named Curtis the seat number of the 3rd Air Marshal. He proceeds to murder her in a straight-up Assassin's Creed fashion. 8-Ball murders the remaining air marshal by stabbing him multiple times. Nadia's heightened senses alert her that something is wrong as she can hear the stabbing sounds. She can also smell his blood. Yuri and 2 other terrorists reveal that they are explosive experts. The leader, Berg, holds everyone at gunpoint and orders them to the back of the plane. He heads to the cockpit, and it is revealed that the co-pilot, Bastian, is also part of the terrorist group. He had murdered the pilot. We can't trust anybody nowadays. Yuri uses an ultraviolet flashlight to reveal hidden wording on the ground. He then turns off the plane's Icars. The system transmits digital messages from the plane to the ground. As the 8-Ball approaches Nadja, covered in blood, her urges cause her to stare at him. Elias says that they should hide in the cargo hold and proceeds to make a run for it. Nadja runs after him and is suddenly hit by Robert. 8-Ball is absolutely crazy, and his over-the-top antics don't sit well with the other terrorists. Because I guess even terrorists hijacking a plane have standards. While she lays on the ground bleeding, we see the continuation of Nadja's previous flashback. She follows Nikolai's tracks to an abandoned house in the middle of the woods. She sees a trail of blood and decides that it's a good idea to follow it. While carrying her 1-year-old baby, she is suddenly ambushed by a vampire. Then she retreats to the basement, where she finds Nikolai's lifeless body. The vampire tries to get into the basement from the outside, but she manages to fight him off until the sunlight causes him to retreat. This is the moment that Nadja becomes infected, as we see a bite mark on her right hand. Back on the plane, we see an injured but still living Nadia retreating to the plane's cargo hold. Farid and 2 other Muslim passengers are taken to the front of the plane. They were forced to read a message to the government written by the terrorists, where Farid gets one of the other passengers killed for trying to be smart. Down in the cargo hole, Yuri begins to make a bomb. Nadja sacrifices a poor little puppy and drinks its blood to regain her strength. This catches the attention of Yuri, who gets thrown around. Ultimately killed by Nadja, we see that drinking blood helps her wounds heal. She is as fast as Wolverine and has increased speed and strength. Nadja discovers that the hijackers planted a parachute from the plane before blowing it up. The 8-Ball tells the passengers that if anyone tries to stop them, a toxic nerve gas will be released from several booby traps. We find out, however, that this is simply a scare tactic, as when Nadja walks past the trap, nothing happens, and she reunites with Elias. She heads to the cockpit and realizes that the pilot is dead. She needs to get the plane turned back around and enlist the help of Muhammad, who has flight experience. Farid realizes that he and Muhammad were set up by the hijackers, who lured them by inviting them to a fake science convention in New York to use them as scapegoats and make them appear like terrorists. Another passenger, named Bill, revealed that the terrorists are trying to influence the stock market and cause a crash by blowing up the plane over to London. The terrorists themselves never admit to this, but this is supported by the news broadcast from the beginning of the film, which spoke about the airline stock prices surging. The hijackers head to the cargo hold and discover Yuri's dead body. They initially suspected that a pit bull had killed him. However, 8-Ball discovers that Nadja is still alive and heads to the cockpit to retrieve her. Burke tells her to open the door and then murders a passenger. When she refuses, she says that he will keep killing passengers until she opens the door. They threaten to shoot a young girl in order to force her hand. Nadja opens the door and saves the girl by taking a huge bite out of Berg's neck. The rest of the group run off, terrified, except for 8-Balls, who appears fascinated by what he sees. We see that Berg is now infected and starts transitioning into a vampire, but Nadja quickly stops him by stabbing his heart with a knife. In a pretty sad scene, we see that the little girl whom she just rescued is terrified of her. This is understandable. All she can see is a blood-sucking monster that just killed someone. She doesn't realize that Nadja saved her life. We see that she even scared her own son. She tells him to keep the cockpit door closed to keep himself safe. Nadja is just as terrified as everyone else by her transformation, which is why she is so determined to find a cure. She goes into the bathroom and injects herself once more with the medication. We see another flashback of Nadja right after becoming infected. She becomes terrified of what she has become and tries to tear out her newly formed fangs with pliers. She returns to the abandoned house searching for answers and meets the vampire who infected her was the vampire's father. We see several scientific texts and instruments in the basement, showing that he was probably searching for a cure. He pulls out a boomstick and begins blasting Naughty. The elder vampire says that evil is uncontrollable and that they must not allow it to keep spreading. She rushes out and tackles him to the ground, where he proceeds to bash his head in with his own crutch. She then steals his supply of medicine from his fridge and sets the house on fire. If you showed me this scene without any context, I'd think she was setting fire to a meth lab after a failed drug deal on the plane. 8-Ball gets a hold of Nadia's diary and realizes that she is a vampire. He arms himself with a UV flashlight on a wooden stake. Alias attempts to drag his mom into the cockpit, but the terrorists return and attack Nadia. 8-Ball uses the UV flashlight to incapacitate her, while the rest of the group tries to regain control of the cockpit. The 8-Ball proceeds to grab a syringe and draws out some of Nadia's blood. He then goes to stab her with a stake, but stops when Elias points a gun at him. He tries to grab the gun out of his hand, but it goes off and shoots through a window, which causes the air pressure to drop drastically. Throughout the plane, everyone on board begins to struggle for oxygen. Douchebag Bill steals an oxygen mask from Grandma to save himself. Nadia grabs a gun and points it at the 8-Ball, but vampirism doesn't improve marksmanship skills. In the cockpit, Muhammad doesn't reach his oxygen mask in time and dies, which allows the hijackers inside to lower their plane and get pressure levels back to normal. This also causes a food cart to roll across the aisle and hilariously crash right into Bill. Nadia goes searching for 8-Balls and finds him in the cargo hold inside of a car. She tries shooting him, but the windshield is bulletproof and he's locked himself inside. She makes a hole in the windshield with a metal rod. However, he snatches it from her grasp. He then pulls out a syringe and starts injecting himself with her blood. He quickly begins transitioning into a vampire, but Nadia proceeds to burn him alive while he has no control over his body. The alarm alerts the terrorists of the fire in the cargo hold, and the Bastion quickly puts it out. They head to the cargo hole, and Carl shoots Nadia in the foot. This causes her to scream, which scares all the other passengers and causes them to panic. They all rush toward the front of the plane to get away from her. Poor old Grandma gets trampled by the group. In the process, they realize 8-Ball is still alive. Curtis goes to check on him and proceeds to sever a large chunk of his neck. 8-Ball gets out of the car, and we see that he has fully transitioned into a vampire. Carl and Bastion try to run away, but only Bastion makes it to the surface. 8-Ball kills Carl by slashing his throat and then lets Curtis feed on his blood. The passenger, who is now also a vampire, arms themselves and goes after Nadia like an angry mob. Angelo was found dead by her husband, Rainer, who believes Nadia is responsible. He grabs a gun and attempts to rush her. She then bites him. She is then restrained by another passenger, but gets free and goes after Farid, who is holding an axe. The other passenger is about to shoot her, but Eileen begs him not to. Nadia hears Vampire 8-Ball and Curtis from the cargo hold and rushes off to block all the doors. Fari tries to help her but gets bit by an 8-Ball in the process. This stops the infection from spreading. Nadia amputates Farid's hand with the axe. She rushes over to the other end of the plane and kills the vampire. We see Rainer has transformed into a vampire and tries to bite an injured builder, but Nadia kills him quickly. Bill has a huge injury to his abdomen, and they enlist the help of a doctor to treat him. Nadia tells Bastion to turn the plane around and head for New York City. He tells her that they don't have enough fuel. Bill has a kidney rupture, according to the doctor, and is in critical condition. He does not want to die. He opens the door and frees the 8-Ball and asks him to turn him into a vampire. The 8-Ball begins attacking all of the passengers and turning them all into vampires. Nadia fears that if they land the plane, the group of vampires will be unleashed, which will cause it to spread uncontrollably. They come up with a plan to land the plane and blow it up as soon as possible. The remaining uninfected get off the plane safely with the help of the UV flashlight to protect them. Elias crawls up to the cargo hold in order to retrieve the remote detonator. Inside of Curtis's pocket, he successfully retrieves the remote, but the vampires are too numerous in numbers. Now have your alias surrounded underneath the car. Nadia tells Farrier that he will have to land the plane and makes him promise to take care of her son. She then kills Bastion and drinks his blood to give her enough power to fight off the rest of the vampires and save Elias. She heads to the cargo hold and gets into a brutal fight with 8-Balls. The 8-Ball is too strong and overpowers Nita. He begins to drink her blood. He uses himself as bait to entice his mother to throw a ball at him. He lures him and uses the detonator to blow up a nearby explosive, which disorients him. Nadia pushes him off the plane, and 8-Ball manages to hang on and climbs his way back into the cargo hold. Farid watches the events from the cockpit and decides to turn the plane in the direction of the sun. Finally, he kills 8-Balls to keep his mother from dying. He slices his hand and feeds Nadja his blood, resuscitating Nadia, but knowing that her urgent bloodthirst will soon become uncontrollable. She pushes Elias away and heads into the cargo hold. We are now back in the present day after transatlantic flight 473 successfully landed on the military airfield. Elias asks about Farid, but he is told that the police will take him into custody. He tries to tell them that Faraday is innocent, but they sedate him. He was shocked. Colonel Drummond is convinced that Ferret is the terrorist leader and orders him to release the hostages. Realizing that he won't be able to convince them that he's innocent, he jumps out of the pilot's chair down into the lower levels, nearly avoiding several sniper shots. An extraction team rushes over and makes entry onto the plane. They successfully extracted Ferret from the plane and drove him away, unaware of the true danger that awaited them. He tries to warn them about the dangers on board, but they refuse to listen to him. Elias is being driven away in an ambulance, but he manages to escape. He ran towards the plane to look for Ferret. Unaware that he was already off the plane, he got off the plane. The military is being picked off one by the vampires. Elias makes it to the plane and sees his own mother, almost unrecognizable as a fully transformed vampire, unable to control her inability to recognize her son. She rushes toward Elias, who takes the detonator out of his teddy bear and blows up the entire plane. It's also possible that Naughty recognized Elias. She chose to charge at him to force him into blowing up the plane. We know there was no other option when we see her engulfed in the flames, but it is never actually confirmed if she dies or not. She wasn't in the immediate blast radius. In the film's final scene, Colonel Drummond orders them to uncut Ferret. This is hilarious because his hand was already chopped off, so he could have possibly just slit his hand right out. Ferret and Elias embrace in front of the flames and wreckage. Typically, a movie like this would wait until the start of the third act to spring its trap, but Blood Red Sky isn't much interested in the element of surprise, inverting viewer expectations, even those who have had the big twist spoiled for them by the film's trailer as it auto-plays on their Netflix home screen. Thorworth and co-writer Stephen Holtz are less concerned with how Nadja complicates the hijacking than they are with how the hijacking complicates Nadja's relationship with Elias. Blood Red Sky is basically a horror movie, but it's also a suspenseful action thriller with a twist. Consider your typical terrorist on a plane scenario, except there's a vampire hiding among the passengers, much to the terrorists' dismay. Nadja, the vampire, is a mother who has been hiding her monstrous nature, but will do anything to protect her young son. You have to admit, that's a pretty amazing setup, and a majority of critics are on board with this unique take on a potential disaster in the sky. If you're up for the mature excitement of it all, this German-English film could be a fun weekend watch. And as you watch, you may be wondering where you've seen Nadja before. That may be a fairly easy question to answer, because she is a German actress with only a few English credits. Unless you're in the habit of watching Scandinavian films, there are just a few projects that you might have encountered before. However, she's a prolific actress who has starred in dramatic films, romantic comedies, major television series, and more. She also comes from a show business family. Her father was actor Edwin Noel, her sister is actor Muriel Baumeister, and her former brother-in-law is Rainer Strecker. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was The Blood Red Sky. My friends, it was a pretty darn good vampire flick. If you ask me, Netflix has been really killing it with their original horror films. Lately, I am absolutely loving it. I feel like this was a pretty fresh take on the vampire genre that had a really engaging and heartfelt story. I would definitely recommend this film to any horror fan, especially those who enjoy the vampire genre, as is customary. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, I would appreciate it if you could leave a like on this video. Thank you all for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see y'all right back here.